Welcome to South Point Church Online. We want to welcome you wherever you're watching at from today. And if this is your first time joining us, we're fired up that you're here today. My name's Matt, and I'm part of the team. Hey, we're in week 2 of a series called Surviving the Age of Rage. And last week together, we discovered a truth that both science and God tell us. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put it up on the screen for us, and it's this right here. Rage is contagious. Rage hurts relationships, and it's physically damaged. Matter of fact, last week together we discovered rage never helps and it always harms. And if this is true, it led us to ask a question last week that we all need an answer to. And here's the question that we asked, and we're going to put it up on the screen. And it's this: how do we avoid rage and its consequences when life daily dumps fuel for outbursts into our lives? Listen, as you and I go through the craziness of life, every day there's a little bit of fuel for rage dumped into our life. And how do we deal with that? Now, here's the good news. Today's message is going to stand on its own. And if you happen to miss last week and you'd like to catch up, you can go to our YouTube channel or to our website and you can watch on demand. Hey, I want to dive in today by sharing a statement that I think I've said in the last month more than I have maybe in my whole life. And you might be wondering, Matt, what statement have you said in the last month that you maybe have said more than your whole life? I'm going to put it up on the screen, and I want to prepare you. You might not be thinking of something that you thought I would say, but here it is. I feel thin on the inside. And as I was going to share this with you, it began to make me think, in this season where science tells us most of us are dealing with low-grade anger, I wonder, has anyone else said, I feel thin on the inside? Or maybe you said some other things. Maybe you told your kids this statement we're going to put up on the screen, and it's this right here: I'm at the end of my rope. Maybe you said this to your spouse. The next one is this: nothing left in the tank. Hey, babe, sorry, but there's nothing left in the tank. Maybe you've had a demanding boss, and here's a phrase that you've said. You said, hey, I'm stretched beyond my limits. And then here's a phrase that I know I've said, and I was wondering if anybody else has said. Maybe in a quiet place, this is something that we uttered to God, and we're going to put it up on the screen, and it's this: I'm done. I wonder, have you said any of these statements? Maybe you've said all of them. And I want you to know that you're not alone, because I've said all of these in the last couple of months. But these statements require us to be honest. Like our emotional exhaustion, these statements remind us of a truth that, like, we're in danger and so are other people because we're exhausted emotionally, right? We're on the razor's edge where the slightest little thing could push us into an outburst of anger and rage that damages ourselves, our relationships, and those around us. And here's something that you already know. There's a cause for feeling like this. Matter of fact, there's one big primary reason we will all make statements like this, and it boils down to one word. And you might be asking, what is this word? And the word is going to make you feel that way, and it's this right here. It's stress. Maybe you want to type that in the chat this morning. You just want to type in stress. Stress is what makes us feel done. Stress is what makes us go, I'm at the end of my rope, or I feel thin. Stress is what leads us there. And by the way, this isn't my opinion or some pastor's idea. This is actually backed by research. And this is what it tells us. Matter of fact, I found an article by the British Association for Anger Management, and it was from this past June, and I'm going to put it up on the screen. And it says this. It says, that is so because stress plays a major role in anger outbursts. Studies, again, science studies have shown that we find it extremely difficult to keep our anger in check and maintain calmness during stressful situations. Stress is a major driver of our anger and outbursts. And it goes on to say this: the effect of stress can be so telling that it can leave us vulnerable to anger outbursts, so much so that we can express our rage regardless of where we may be. This is why you'll see people flip out in the grocery stores. You'll see them flip out at work at the water cooler about a conversation. It's why you'll see people flip out in front of their kids or at their spouses or even online. And it goes on to answer, well, what should we do? And it says this: if you are one prone to quick to anger, the first step you could take in managing anger is to consider stress. And the reason is that stress can, and there's that word we've been talking about, fuel anger or resentment. Stress is what fuels our anger and our rage. And it wasn't just the British Association of Anger Management this June of 2020. Matter of fact, Ohio State University, their medical center released an article the May of this year, 2020. And here's what it says. I'm gonna put it up and it says, first and foremost, increased frustration and irritability can be a common reaction to, you guessed it, stress. With the current pandemic, many aspects of our daily lives are more stressful than usual. There it is again. What's the fuel for this anger and this rage that creates harm in our lives and the lives of others? Well, stress. And it goes on to say this. During times of increased stress, it can be particularly important to check in with yourself, to take a moment to pause, to notice how you're thinking and feeling, and acknowledge that the feelings of frustration are a normal reaction to increased stress. It is stress. And is there a next slide for that, or is that it? And so go back to that one. And so it leads me asking a question as I was kind of thinking about this. Where does this overload of stress come from? Like, where does this all come from? And as I was thinking about this, I wrote a question down this week. And when I wrote the question down, I was like, hey, God, there's no way that I'm sharing that this Sunday. Because if I share that question, people are going to get mad and people might check out. But as I wrestled with this question, I realized that there was a nugget of truth that might set us free. So as I asked this question, if your first response is to check out, I would ask that you would stay with me just for a while because there might be some truth that sets us free. And here's the question that I wrote down, and I'm going to put it up on the screen, and it's this. What if the overload of stress is a self-inflicted choice? Now, I get it. You might be going, Matt, I didn't ask for the pandemic. I didn't ask for all the things that go with it, and those things have created stress. And the answer is yes, that's fair. But if we're all honest, as we go through life, life gives us things that are stressful that weren't really our choice. And listen, I'm with you. Whenever I feel thin, I really want to blame it on others. But what if the overload of stress is something that maybe we're not taking as much responsibility for ourselves as we should? Which leads me to share a story that happened to me a couple weeks ago that I think illustrates what if the overload of stress is a self-inflicted choice. And so here's a true story that happened to me a couple weeks ago. Occasionally I'll have evening meetings. So a couple weeks ago, I had an evening meeting. I knew it would start, somewhere around 5 or so, and it would go to 8 or 8:30. And so I'm an early riser. I do my best thinking and working early in the morning. And so I knew that I was going to come in early, and I had kind of planned to take kind of the afternoon part off for a couple of hours to kind of rest and recoup so that I'd be fresh for that meeting and then just not be exhausted when I got home. Well, the day got away from me, and even though I came in early, when it was 3 or 4 o'clock and I should have left and taken some time, taken a couple hours so I could come back refreshed, I kind of kept on working and only took about a half an hour, 45 minutes to decompress, went straight into my meeting, and then I stayed to chat a little bit afterwards, and I got home around 8:30. And you can guess, by that time I'd been in when it was dark and got home after it had been dark for a while. And I was exhausted. And my wife said hi, and I said hi to my wife and kids, and I said, hey, I'm just going to relax. I'm really exhausted and done. And so I put on a show. I've been watching this show on Netflix. I don't know if you ever do that when you just need to just like relax. And so I said, hey, I just need to veg for a little bit. And I go to bed early, usually around 9:30ish, right? But it was 8:30, 8:45 by the time I started this episode. And I don't know if you've ever watched shows on Netflix, but they never end like you can go, oh, I can wait. They always end like on a cliffhanger. Well, 3 episodes later at about 11:30, even though I had been up since early, worked exhausted, I had binged 3 shows, and I went to bed and I knew I had to be up early the next day and go to work. And so the reality is that I created stress. The overworking and the over-binging actually didn't help. I was exhausted the next day. I wasn't as good as my job as I needed to be. And I'm pretty sure I was short with my staff and probably my family because I was exhausted. And it leads me to something that I discovered about myself that maybe might be true of many of us here today. And I'm going to kind of show it on a slide. But I want you to know the 2 things I'm going to show you on this next slide are something that our culture celebrates. And here's what it is. I'm going to put it up on the screen. We culturally celebrate overwork, right? Like, listen, I got in early. I had planned on taking some time off, but I had some work to do and there's some people in, so I didn't want it to seem like I was lazy. And here in America, we celebrate overworking. If you like work 12 or 14 or 10 hours a day, people are like, oh, you're really good. We celebrate overworking here in America as a cultural norm. Did you know America is in the bottom 3 of using their vacation days worldwide? It's because we celebrate overwork. And then we also celebrate over binging. I mean, think about it. Almost no other country celebrates binge eating, binge drinking, binge watching, binge spending, and binging on illicit things that aren't good for us. But we celebrate those things. And so here's what's amazing. Most of us don't live in the overwork space, and most of us don't live in the over binge space. But the reality is that we will often swing in between those extremes. And that day, I literally did both of those things. And here's what I discovered. I overworked for the first half of the day and then over binged in the evening. And why do we do those things? Well, overworking looks good and over binging, well, it feels good. But if you're here and you're adult, you know just because something looks good and just because something feels good doesn't mean it's good for us. And here's what I want to say. The stress that I experienced the next day was past Matt set up present Matt to fail by my choices that I made. And it led me to this truth that I've been wrestling for a while. And maybe this is just a truth for me, but maybe this might be a truth for some of you here today. And I'm going to put it up on the screen, and it's this right here. The self-inflicted stress of not practicing self-care is present me setting up future me to fail. Like the act of not self-caring by taking some time off, and then binge watching was present me setting up the next day for me not to do so well. And it leads me asking, is it possible that the self-inflicted stress is us not practicing self-care, where we're taking our current self and setting our future self up not to win? And I know that's not like that's not something we all want to hear, but is that possible? Maybe we're overloaded with stress because we don't practice self-care. Now, whenever I mention the word self-care, I want to say 2 things because there's some ideas about self-care. The first one is self-care is all about just kind of resting and relaxation, and that's not really true. Matter of fact, I'm going to go back to the next slide. We're going to put up on here is, we culturally celebrate overworking and over binging, right? And self-care is recovery. We should get some sleep. We should take our vacations. We should have fun with our kids. We should go on date nights with our spouse. We need some recovery from all the stress and all the work that we do, raising our kids and putting food on the table and doing all the chores. We just need to have some rest and some recovery, right? So most people go, oh, self-care is recovery, but there's actually a flip side to recovery that is part of the same coin, and that is restraint, which is, listen, we don't need to over binge on our shows and stay up too late. We don't need to over binge on food. We don't need to over binge on alcohol. There's certain things that we know that hey, it's okay to have a little extra. But when we continue to over binge, self-care is to go, no, I know if I do and have too much of that, it's actually, while it feels good, is going to be bad for me. Self-care is both recovery and restraint against the things that look good of overwork and the over binging of feels good. And I understand that we have a lot of people here in different spaces when it comes to where you're at with saying yes to Jesus. And you might be going, what does self-care have to do with following Jesus? And here's what I'm going to say. I've read the Bible front to back a whole bunch of times, and I'm not bragging, but here's something that I would say. God from the beginning has says the best thing that we can do for ourselves is make decisions to care for ourselves, to make decisions that lead to life and goodness. And God consistently calls humanity to stop making decisions that lead to death and destructions. I think God has been about self-care way before modern psychology came up with this phrase that we should care for ourselves. That's something that God has been asking for a really long time, right? And so it leads us into this question. In this crazy world, right? It's a crazy world. It's a hectic world. And we've got kids and jobs and all the things they need to do. How do we practically do self-care? What does that actually look like in everyday life? And this is why I say it every week. This is why I'm a passionate follower of Jesus. It's what I love about God, Jesus, and the Bible. Jesus addresses real issues in real ways with real practical help for everyday people. Jesus doesn't just give us these pie in the sky ideas that don't help us in everyday life. Matter of fact, Jesus addresses this very issue. If you've ever made the statement, I'm thin, I'm overwhelmed, I'm at the end of my rope, I have nothing left in the tank, and I'm done. Because humanity has been saying that since the beginning. And so we're going to look at an eyewitness account where Jesus actually addresses this. So we're going to see it. An eyewitness account of the Gospel of Matthew, we're going to put up on the screen. It says this: Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Now, I want to stop here, and I just want to brag on Jesus. And I want to make two really important points. First, and I need you to stop. If you got kids, or you're talking to your spouse, or you're looking at the chat, I need you to stop for a second. Do you notice that Jesus doesn't give people shame or blame if they are burdened and weary? And here's why Jesus never will give you shame or blame when you are weary and burdened. Because we all live in a broken world, and being weary and burdened is what happens. And what I love about this is he says, you can come to me. And he says, come to me, all of you. This isn't like, hey, if you've got it all together, hey, if you've never made a mistake, hey, only come to me if the burdens are because someone else put it on you. No, even if you made the mess yourself, even if you don't know that he's really there, his invitation isn't about shame or blame, and it's to all. I mean, that's how much Jesus is for you, for me, and for we. And then he says this: take my yoke upon you. And then he goes on and says this: let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. I wonder how many of us in this season, in the age of rage, need to find rest for our souls. And what I love about what Jesus says is he says, listen, let me teach you because I am humble and gentle. I mean, Jesus is the one, as they nailed him to the cross, said, Father, forgive them. Where it says he's gentle, Jesus says, no one put me on the cross. I went there because I am for you. I love how Jesus doesn't give us shame or blame, that he comes to us full of love. And he's able to do what the world cannot, and that is to give us rest for our souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. Jesus offers you, Jesus offers me, Jesus offers all of us, regardless of where you're at, whether you have no faith, different faith, or you said yes to Jesus, an opportunity to come and learn from him and experience rest in our souls. Well, what does that look like? And so if I was going to take Jesus' word and kind of put it in a sentence, here's what I would say, and it's this: surrendering to Jesus is a self-care that protects us from self-inflicted stress. See, what I love about Jesus is he says we have to get rid of our yoke and we have to take his. That word is surrender. That means we need to let go of the American model of overworking and over-binging. You know, I was talking to a couple of friends earlier this week, and I was talking about how much of the stress in my life is driven by my insecurity and my hurt, that I want approval and I want to feel successful. And that's not what Jesus calls us to. Jesus says, I love you, I'm enough. And we can let go that model of overworking and over-binging. And then we need to learn. We need to learn and practice what self-care looks like that protects us. You know what's amazing is that when God took a whole nation and he created a culture for them, do you know that he gave them 3 mandatory weeks of vacation? You can look it up in the Old Testament. Jesus commands us to get rest. Matter of fact, Jesus in the middle of the storm was so exhausted, he was sleeping on the cushion. You know what? Jesus and God ask us to take care of ourselves, but we have to let go and to surrender to him. And so today, I could spend 4 weeks on each of the next 3 subjects. But there are 3 primary areas that are major stress areas that can cause us to be on the edge, where we explode with rage and anger and we hurt ourselves and our others. And so I just want to say, what does it look like to surrender to Jesus and practice self-care in these 3 practical areas that, whether you have no faith, different faith, or you said yes to Jesus, that we're all going to have to deal with. And here's the first main area we're going to put up on the screen, and it's this: physically. Matter of fact, if you don't believe me, this is exactly where Snickers came up with their campaign, right? Are you hangry? And they show someone and they're all like angry and mad and they say, here, eat a Snickers. It's because there's an old adage. I don't know if you know this about me. But when I became a follower of Jesus, I had some addiction issues and I had to go through the recovery process. And I believe if you have hurts, habits, or hangups, that everyone maybe should take a look at Celebrate Recovery, because we all have things that are built into our life that hurt us. And one of the acronyms that I learned in the recovery process is something called HALT. And what that means is you need to stop whenever you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, right? And 2 of those things are things that you feel physical, right? When you're hungry, you haven't eaten, you haven't had enough water, or you're just exhausted and tired. We all know that our margin is thin when we're hungry or when we're tired. Snickers made a whole thing about that. And so we have to physically do something. And so what is a step that we can take? We can acknowledge our God-given limits. Listen, I don't know how many of you here own a car, but my guess is most of you that are watching this either own a car or have been in a car. Maybe you just want to type car in the chat. Like, you own a car, you've been in a car, you've ridden a car. Do you know most cars have something called a tachometer? And what a tachometer is this little speed dial that lets you know how fast the engine revolutions per minute. And it has this red section over to one side. And the red section is a warning that if your engine stays going too fast, too long, your engine will blow up, because nothing is made to operate at 110% or 100% all the time. That's how engines blow up. Ask any race car driver. If there are any of you out there, if you get to the red line and you stay there too longer, your engine blows up and it doesn't work. We live here in Southern Maryland in a naval community with lots of engineers. And engineers who design things know that every once in a while you have to take a piece of equipment and you have to take it out of service and restore it. You would never get in an airplane that doesn't get constant maintenance, because at some point something is going to break and then it's going to end poorly. And what's amazing is we understand that about physical things, mechanical things. But that is also true of us, of human beings. Are we tired? Are we just exhausted? When's the last time you got a full night's sleep? When's the last time that you took one full day off? You took a vacation day. You didn't do it to work. You just stopped and you let your body be still. You went to bed at a good time and you slept in. Are you taking care of your body physically? Because when we don't and our body isn't working right, our margin is thin and our stress on us is really hard. Which leads me in to the second area. Matter of fact, survey after survey tells us this next area that I'm going to mention is the number one stressor of people here in America. And my guess is it's probably the number one stressor worldwide, no matter what country you're in. And I'm going to put up on the screen is this. It's financially, right? This is the thing that causes lots of arguments in marriage, right? Money. It's the thing that we worry about, money. It's finances. And so how can we reduce the stress? How can we practice self-care when it comes to finances? And we can accept God's wisdom about wealth. True story. This was before COVID. I was spending some time with my family and I was riding in the car with my adopted dad. And it was just me and my adopted dad. And I was talking to him about how he raised us. And now that I'm a dad and I'm raising my kids and I'm putting them through college, I looked at my dad and said, I don't know how you did it, Dad. How did you do it? And how did you work so hard and pay for everything? And I go talking about car insurance, college bills. And then I looked my dad in the eye and I said these words. I said, Dad, I remember what you taught me about money. And my dad, before I could finish my statement, uttered these words. Oh, that you should save the first 10% of your paycheck. And I gave him one of those looks that you said, you ever seen your dog kind of give you that and that's what it is. I go, no, Dad, you never taught me that. And I love my adopted dad. My adopted dad is awesome. He taught me lots of great things, but he never stopped me down and kind of taught me about finances. I go, no, Dad, you taught me that I should give the first 10% back to God because he's given me everything that I've given. I wish you would have taught me the thing you said first because I've been practicing this other thing. And had I been practicing saving 10%, maybe I wouldn't have as much stress in my life today because past me would have set up current me to be better, right? And so listen, there's some wisdom in the Bible about managing our resources, about generosity is kind of a recovery. It lets us love others and allows us to be generous towards ourselves. And then there's a thing called saving. Budget isn't a prison. Budget actually helps you. And listen, I want to say something. Listen, debt is not a sin, but it is absolutely a shackle. If finances are the number one stress in our life, what if we accepted God's wisdom about wealth? And did you know at South Point, we actually have small groups around this whole idea. We do a Dave Ramsey class, and we also have I was broke, and now I'm not. Because here at South Point, we are for you, and we want to give you practical resources. So if we want to have less stress in our lives and create less self-infliction, the first thing we need to do is go, is present me setting up future me to win physically? Am I acknowledging my God-given limits? The second thing we need to do is go financially. Is present me setting up future me to win? Have I accepted God's wisdom about wealth? Am I using good things and accepting those and doing those so I'm not stressed about debt and bills and all those other things? And those are two big stressors. And then here's the third big stressor that I've experienced, and we're going to put it up here on the screen, and it's this. It's relationally. Listen, if you're here and you're married, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you're not winning in your marriage, you don't feel like you're winning at life. If you're here and you're a parent and you don't feel like you're winning at parenting, it's hard to feel like you're winning in other areas. That we want to win relationally. And it's often the relational tension, the relational disconnect, the relational discord that creates stress in our lives, especially with our family and our coworkers and our friends, right? That is a key area of stress in our life. Well, what we can do is we can act on Jesus' rule on how to treat people, right? Jesus tells us what we should do. We should love people the way Jesus loved us. Now, when it comes to relational self-care, there are two things that I've learned. One is we've got to practice forgiveness. I've talked about that. You can go and look at that. But we should practice forgiveness and we need to practice healthy boundaries. And those two things will really help us both do recovery and restraint. I'll never forget, I was reading a book by a Christian psychiatrist. And this Christian psychiatrist was confused why it seemed like followers of Jesus and people who weren't following Jesus had the same kind of relational struggles. They each had the same amount, the same kind. And he was like, well, shouldn't Jesus followers be better at relationship than people who aren't Jesus followers? And he said, I discovered a truth, and I'll never forget the words in the book that I read, and I'm going to share them with you today. And here's what this Christian counselor, the psychologist, who worked with thousands and thousands of people for 20 years. And he said this, he goes, I've discovered relationships are like bank accounts. You're either making deposits or withdrawals. And if you continue to make more withdrawals than deposit, eventually the relationship fails. And so I want to ask, if you have some relational discord, if you have some just anxious and some things that aren't going well, have you acted on Jesus' rule on how to treat people? Are you loving them? Are you treating them the way you want to be treated? Are you making deposits? Or are you the kind of person that is continuing to make withdrawals and you end up with relational discord? And so I want to ask, when it comes to your relationship, is present you setting future you up to win? Because all three of these things tend to be the biggest stressors. And when these get out of whack, not because of the outside world, but because of the choices, either we chose to overwork and we ignore these things, or because we overbinge and then we get the consequences of these things. It leads us all asking the question that God told me to ask myself. Hey, Matt, is current Matt setting future Matt up to win? God loves us and God is for us. But because of love, God allows us to make choices. And our choices might be creating self-inflicted stress that we don't need. And if I was going to sum up this whole thing, if I was going to go, hey, listen, I need you to stop and just draw in. If I wanted you to hear this one thing, I would sum it up this way and put it up on the screen. It's this. Jesus-led self-care lets present you set up future you to win at life. And here's what I know. If you're here today and you're kind of curious, but you're not really sure about this Jesus thing, maybe your family really wasn't into the God or Jesus. You had some different faith background. Maybe you grew up in church and you said yes to Jesus. Regardless of where you're at, the reality is that we hope that present us sets future us up to win. And Jesus tells us that if we let him lead us in self-care, if we let go of the model of overwork and over binge, and we surrender and we learn from him how to do recovery and how to have restraint, if we can do that in the moment, we set our future selves up to have less stress and less pain and less problems so that we're not full of low-grade anger and rage, and we create harm in our lives and the lives of those we love. So here's what I want to do. Listen, I don't know where you're at in your journey, but I want to give you a challenge. Here's my challenge. No matter where you're at, I want you to pick one of those areas. Maybe it's physically. Maybe it's financially. Maybe it's relationally. Here's what I'd like you to do. Maybe for the next 30 days, ask what would Jesus-led self-care in one of those areas. Just don't pick all three because we can't do it all at the same time, right? Everything can't be the number one priority. Just pick one, right? Maybe it's your finances. I'm going to make a budget. I'm going to start saving. I'm going to manage it so it doesn't manage me, right? Pick one area and let Jesus-led self-care lead you for the next 30 days and look back and go, at the end of 30 days, am I less stressful? Is there less pain and worry and anxiety on the inside of me because I am practicing recovery and restraint in this area that would lead to life? And so that's my challenge. Hey, I want to close with something that happened to me. Gosh, it was only a couple of weeks ago. I was taking a good friend out for their birthday, and my friend's birthday, and we grabbed another friend, and we were all going to go to this place, and I did a pretty poor job. I thought we'd be able to just go to this place and just get in, but because of COVID and because of the crowd, you needed to have advanced reservations, and I didn't do that. So we drove an hour and a half to this place to do this thing, to celebrate my friend, and we couldn't even do it. And I was embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, I've ruined my friend's birthday. I wanted to make him feel special and celebrate him. And it was an epic failure, right? And so I was like, what can we do? And so we're in the car and we all have our cell phones. Well, I don't have my cell phone out because I'm driving, right? But they had their cell phones out and we're trying to figure out ideas. And as I'm thinking about my epic failure and trying to figure out, right, what we could do and where we could go that would be fun to celebrate my friend, I wasn't paying attention, right? And I ran a red light. And my friend whose birthday was sitting in the front passenger seat and you yelled at me, it's a red light, right as we blew past it. And there was 4 lanes of highway coming the other way. Thank God that there were no other cars coming the other way. Because if I had ran that red light when cars were coming the other way, it would have created devastating damage to the car and to us. And you might be asking, Matt, what does that have to do with stress and self-care? You see, when we don't practice self-care, we run through the red light that God has given us, these boundaries of restraint, these boundaries of recovery. We run through it. And every once in a while when we run through it, we don't get hit by the car. So we think it's okay to keep running through. And the reality is we continue to run through red light after red light of these boundaries of restraint and recovery. Eventually, life will wreck us. And that's not God's plan for you. So our hope and prayer here at South Point is that we would allow Jesus to lead us in what self-care looks like for both recovery and restraint so that we can experience the life that Jesus offers all of us. I hope today that you'll never forget you matter deeply to God. God bless.